Well, good day and welcome to SOP, Save Our Planet. My name is Gary Willing and I hope you are having a wonderful October the 11th, wherever you are. And if you're not listening to this video on that particular day, you are entitled to have a good day too. But just remember, it is all up to you, so make it a good one. Now, at the beginning of each and every one of these videos, I suggest to anybody who cares to know more about this information that the best thing to do is to do some research for yourself, look into this information, however you want to look into it. But if you check out the information on the Share International site, you'll get the best information in one spot there than you can anywhere else. That's why I always recommend doing it. And the link is at the very top of the link description. So hopefully you'll take advantage of it. And then the second thing is join the discussion if that's what you want to do. Ask me a question, post a question in the comment section, and I'll do my very best to try to answer it in the next video. If you have a comment you want to put in there, just post your comment or email me, searchforsigns@mail.com. All right, let's get on into it. So what was the first question I wanted to tackle? John, you had a question for me. He said, "Hi, Gary. What do you think about Mohammed Mesbahi? It seems like he is greatly inspired by Maitreya and the Masters. He seems like an interesting man. Thank you for all you do." Well, thank you for all you do, John, and thank you for the question. Now, if I have to be 100% honest with you, I'm a little embarrassed about this, because I'll tell you why I'm embarrassed. I didn't know who you were talking about. And that in and of itself isn't embarrassing, but the fact that I actually know the guy, I was not picking up on who you were talking about. And I'll tell you the story, how we met and all that kind of stuff was kind of funny. But when I read your question, I went to YouTube and I searched videos on YouTube for Mohammed Mesbahi, excuse me. And a musician came up and I was listening to the music a little bit and I was like, what does this have to do with what I talk about? Is this person inspired by Maitreya? No, probably not, right? And then I said, well, maybe he misspelled the name. So I tried changing the name of Muhammad a little bit and putting one M instead of two, or actually in this case, three M's or two M's instead of three. But anyway, and then a boxer came up and I was like, what does this have to do with anything, right? Well, anyway, I was going to record the video this morning, and I was like, did I Google that name? And I went, no, I haven't Googled that name yet. So I Googled it. And then it said something about STWR, share the world's resources. And I went, oh. And the reason I went, oh, is because I've actually met him before. I don't know him very well, but I've met him and I know him, and he's a lovely person. If you don't know him, he's great. If you don't know what STWR does, definitely go to their website and look at what they're doing, because I think what they're doing is great work, right? But years ago, when I was a part of the Share International group, we took advantage of this. It was a peace and justice rally. So we took advantage of them being in Atlanta, and we set up a booth there. And so we had our table set up, and most of the rally was during the week, and we all had jobs, so we kind of divide and conquer. So I was sitting in the table by myself. Muhammad comes up. I didn't know who he was. He introduced himself, seemed like a lovely person. We struck up a conversation. He starts talking about Share International and Benjamin Crème, and I can clearly see he knows what he's talking about, or he's at least very familiar with the information. And I asked him, how do you know this? And he goes, well, I think he said he was a part of the Share International group. And he said Benjamin Crème was a friend of his for years. And I went, oh, really? So then I, really started to engage in conversation with him. And then he took me over to his table, and I was looking at what they were doing. And I thought it was wonderful what they were doing, right? So the next day I came back, because I finished up that shift. And then the next day I came back in the afternoon, and one of the ladies in the group who was manning the table in the morning time looked rather miffed. And in fact, my impression was she looked like a wet cat, if you know what a wet cat looks like. And I was like, what's the problem? And she said, well, there's this group right over there called Share the World's Resources, and they're talking about the same thing. And I said, yeah, isn't that wonderful? And she goes, no, they're copying what Ben said. And I'm like, and, it doesn't matter. I mean, Ben doesn't own the rights to sharing the resources of the world or talking about it, right? He hasn't trademarked or copyrighted that term. And she was like, oh, that's just awful that they're saying what they're saying. And I said, no, you should go back over there and talk to them again. They're wonderful. I talked to them yesterday, and I was trying to, share my side of what I thought and stuff like this, and they weren't getting it. And then there were a couple other people from Share International. I recommended that they go over there. They didn't want to go over there either. It was weird. It was just weird. But it really is indicative of the masters and how the masters will give advice. And what do I mean by that? Well, years upon years ago, the Share International group was not known as the Share International group. They were just a group of people. They wanted to do more, and they wanted to kind of engage with the community and wanted to set up itself as a nonprofit and so forth, and they needed to come up with a name. And Ben's master advised against using a name. Just don't have a name. And I even asked him why. And Ben's master said, well, when you do this, it creates boundaries and fences, and then you have to kind of step over those boundaries and fences to see the other person's point of view and so forth. And it's better just to keep all the guards down and let people come and go as they please and have it be more of a organic group than an organization. Well, of course, the Share International group didn't take his advice. They didn't listen to him, which is their right. They didn't have a right to, they could have, gone either way with it. I remember I was taking more of what the master said literally, that we should not use names and so forth. And like I said, they didn't listen to me as well they shouldn't, but they didn't listen to Benjamin Creme's master. And so when somebody like this comes from a different point of view, well, of course, it can be triggering emotionally because it's them versus us, which it never should be like that, as far as I'm concerned. So that's the outcome of it, But I found him to be absolutely wonderful. In fact, I got him a room at the hotel that I worked at and gave him the employee discount and everything. He was really, really grateful about that for sure, because it was like $25 for a Marriott courtyard room. He was excited. And they even invited me to dinner with them, and I got to know everybody and just thought they were the most wonderful people. And I think they're doing great work. He said something about Ben was not very supportive of STWR, and he went to Ben beforehand and told him what he wanted to do. And Ben said, he advised against it. And Ben's reasoning for not supporting what he said was not that there's anything really inherently wrong about talking about sharing the resources, or that it was Ben's idea and he shouldn't say it because it was Ben's idea. It wasn't anything like that. It was the fact that Muhammad knew of Maitreya, believed 100% that Maitreya is who Ben was saying he was. And he was kind of taking him out of the message and just talking about his priorities. And I think Ben said, even because this is coming from what I remember Muhammad saying, something to the effect of, the world leaders will not listen to a group like STWR to share the resources. They're going to look to Maitreya eventually. And it would be better for us to spend our time and energy and focus in on talking about Maitreya in order for Maitreya to come out and the world leaders have an opportunity to talk to him that way, I think is really what it amounted to. But I didn't really see a problem with it. I see where Ben's coming from. And Ben always advised against watering down the message and taking Maitreya out of the message and just having it be about the priorities. There's nothing wrong with talking about the priorities of Maitreya. I do it all the time. But I also talk about Maitreya because it's very important that we at least have an understanding of the truth, whether you believe it or not, in who and what Maitreya is. So. But yes, he's a wonderful, wonderful man. I found him to be very generous, and especially generous in his listening. He listened very well to what I had to say about my things, and I was able to. It made it easier for me to listen to what he had to say. And again, I never had a problem with what they did because I spent a lot of time with them when they were here in Atlanta and took advantage of being around them, in that way. Is he inspired by the masters and Maitreya to do what they do? Maybe. I don't see why he couldn't be. He's discussing one of the major priorities of the teacher, so why not? But thank you very much for bringing his name up. Again, I was embarrassed when I found out who you were talking about, because I was like, he even sent me a book. I did an interview with one of the guys from his group, and if you go to the videos list on my channel, it was about 4 years ago, and it's easier to find it under the most popular to the least popular videos and just go down about 15 or 20 videos and it's right there, rather than trying to go back 4 years and trying to find it that way. It'd take you forever because I put up a lot of videos. But I did a video with a guy named Adam from STWR. to be honest, I actually really learned a lot, not only about what they do and their mission, but also about the principle of sharing. I learned a lot from what he said. And a lot of the things that I talk about in regards to sharing, especially as it relates to the Marshall Plan, it came out of that conversation I had with him. So I think they're wonderful what they do. But like I said, that's just my own personal opinion. But thank you very much for the question. All right, Timothy Tilton, you had a question, and I'm glad you're asking this question now versus waiting to possibly make a mistake in the future. But why are you against telling friends or whomever what program you might recognize Maitreya on in the future? You nor he would be infringing on anyone's free will if you were to tell someone. You'd be helping a brother out. Well, you're not the only person who's tried to get me to see a different way of this. Or, there are people who think that Maitreya should be saying his name all along, right? They don't understand that law of infringing their free will. And I am mainly coming from the recommendation from Ben's master. I trust the source of that information and am taking it at his word that that would be an infringement on someone's free will if you were to go against that and say, that person is Maitreya on TV, because it was advised not to do that. And if I can just take a brief moment for all those who listen to these videos on a regular basis, there will come a time when you will see Maitreya on TV, and I'm sure you'll be tempted to post a comment about that and say, I saw this person on TV and I think it's Maitreya and is using this name. And if I do see that, I'll take it down, and if it's put back up again, I'll have to ban that person from commenting, because I am not going to be discussing this. So you can explain away as much as you want, and you can explain your side to me as much as you think it is an infringement upon people's free will, but I think it is. And again, I'm also taking Ben's master's word at his word. And I've seen when we don't take advice from these masters, the consequences that come out of it. I just talked about it with the Share International group. So I'm taking what he said literally, to be honest. So it's not, I found out about this information from Maitreya's Mission Volume 2 book that I saw in a bookstore. And when I picked it up, nobody was there to tell me that was Maitreya or there was any truth to it. But the way I came into this information was, I think, a way a lot of people will come into this information, but just at a later date. And I think it will mean more when you actually see Maitreya on TV versus reading it in a book. But anyway, I came across this information years upon years ago, of course, when I went to a bookstore with a friend of mine for him to pick out a book, not for me, but for him to pick out a book. And I eventually came across Maitreya's Mission, Volume 2. And when I saw it, my immediate reaction was, I know that name. Where do I know that name? And I couldn't put my finger on it. And then when I opened up the book, it went right to the picture of Maitreya. And I felt this flood of energy and love come over the top of me. I was like, well, who is this guy? Right? I thought it was just some guru, right? I didn't know anything about it. But I was like, I've seen him before somewhere. Where have I seen this guy? And of course I had seen him, but he looked different, and I just hadn't remembered it. So it encouraged me enough to get the book. And then when I went home to sit down and finally read it, I didn't like it. And I've said this before on videos. I did not like what I was reading at first. And I understand why people are turned off by this, because I was turned off by it the same way. I thought Ben sounded very arrogant, and I just wasn't picking up on what I'm picking up on now. So I read it differently now. But when I first picked it up, I didn't like it. I put the book down. I think a few days later I picked it back up and didn't like it any better. Put the book back down again, and I decided to myself I would take the book back to the bookstore. And then I was like, every time I would go to do it, I was like, it's too far. The bookstore's too far away. I'm not going to drive all the way there, right? So my laziness kind of paid off for me, I guess, in this case. Doesn't always, but sometimes it does. Anyway, so the book was sitting on my counter for months. And for a while, I would kind of think about going back and reading it again, and I would put it off. In this case, my procrastination was not paying off for me, right? So sometimes it pays off for you, sometimes it doesn't. But anyway, this time it wasn't. So I kept, putting it off long enough to where I was like, well, they're never going to return the book. So I was like, I let that one go. And then sometime later after that, I don't know how long it was, I picked it up again. And then I kind of read something a little differently, I guess, and it made a little bit more sense to me. And then I read a little bit more, and then it started to have kind of the ring of truth for me. And here's what I'm saying where I think people will have kind of the same experience. When it dawned on me at that time that it was true for me, and it had the ring of truth, it really opened my heart. I couldn't see the world the same way anymore. I couldn't see myself in the world in the same way. The reality of life and everything changed to where I could not go back to the way it was for me. And had somebody been there to force me to read it or to tell me to believe it, and then I read it based on what they said because I respected what they said, I would not have had that same, realization at that time and revelation at that time. And to be honest with you, I probably would resent that person for if I would have known that would have been the case, because what happened and the way that it happened, when I was able to sit there in my apartment at the time and say to myself, I don't agree with this, I was free to be able to say that to myself. I never called anybody. I never told anybody about the book. I never made great strides against it. I just didn't agree with it at the time. And it took me quite some time to come around to where I saw that there was truth to this. And then when I remembered the experiences that I had, nobody told me that I had experiences with Maitreya. I remembered them. And when I remembered them based on starting to read this information, then my heart really opened up to the reality of this and the truth of this information. And then my life really changed at that point. But had somebody told me that, you remember that time when you had that, I would not have had the same experience. And I know this is going to sound hyperbolic, Tim, but if I, in the future, tell anybody that person is Maitreya and you believe it, or anybody believes what I'm saying because they respect my opinion on it, and they lose out on that opportunity to have that open heart feeling of what it's like to recognize the truth in this for themselves, they'll never forgive me. And I personally would never forgive myself, to be honest. So I'm never going to say it. So I'm sorry, but I'm never going to say it. The only thing that Ben said that we're supposed to say, if asked, is to pose the question back to them, what do you think? Which is how it should be. So please don't think you know more about the law of free will than these masters do, especially if you believe the masters, right? There's got to be a reason why. And even if you look back in the Bible, I think it's in Matthew, it's even said in there, if somebody says, I'm the Messiah, don't believe them. If they say, go into the wilderness to try to find the Messiah, don't go running into the wilderness. People have tried to use that verse against me, saying that's telling you the same thing. But Maitreya is not saying he's the Messiah. He's not saying he's the Christ. He's not even saying he's Maitreya for that very reason. I don't think Jesus went around saying he was the Messiah. He knew he was the Messiah, but he never said it. And the reason why I think that what I'm thinking is true is because it took Peter to recognize him and to have the courage to speak that truth. So had he gone around the whole time saying he was the Messiah, that little scene where Peter said he was the Messiah, was the Christ, wouldn't have had the impact that it had, But there were people, I think, even during the time of Jesus, that were going around saying they were the Messiah, believing they were the Messiah. I'm sure people followed them thinking that they were the Messiah, but they weren't. Jesus was the Messiah. So Maitreya doesn't need to prove to anybody who and what he is. He's just hoping that you can listen to him with an open mind. And you can't listen to him with an open mind if you already are prejudiced to thinking that it is him. But once you have that heart realization that it is him, then it doesn't matter. You can think it or not. But we will know, everybody at the same time will know that person is Maitreya on the day of declaration when it happens. And that's it. Up until that point, it's not important, But anyway, I'm glad you asked the question, because it's better to ask these questions now than to wait, and when it finally does come up, you have no you know, you don't know what to do with it, and you make a mistake like that. Because if you infringe the free will of someone else, you harm the other person. And when you harm somebody else, the harm comes back to you. So there's something to think about. But the other thing I wanted to say too is, and this goes for anybody, you said at the end of your comment, help a brother out. You know, you'd be helping a brother out. You can help a brother out by letting them know who and what Maitreya is, and about their priorities, and about the reappearance of these of the Christ and the Masters of Wisdom into the everyday world as they're doing, if you believe it, and if you are interested in that. And it's important to look at our role in this, that we don't have to wait for Maitreya to come out. We can actually we can be active participants in ourselves in this. And it doesn't mean you have to devote your whole life to this information. It doesn't mean you have to start a YouTube channel like I did. You can say it however you want to say it, with it, as little or as much as you want. But something that the Master DK said might be encouraging to those people who are interested in this information, want to help out but don't know what to do. And this is coming from one of the Masters, and I'll leave you with this thought. Your spiritual goal is the establishment of the kingdom of God. One of the first steps towards this is to prepare men's minds to accept the fact that the reappearance of the Christ is imminent. Now keep in mind this was written 80 years ago, so the reappearance of the Christ has already happened and is continuing to happen. So it's not imminent, it's actually happening. You must tell men everywhere that the masters and their groups of disciples are actively working to bring order out of chaos. You must tell them that there is a plan, and that nothing can possibly arrest the working out of that plan. You must tell them that the hierarchy stands, and that it has stood for thousands of years, and is the expression of the accumulated wisdom of the ages. You must tell them above all else that God is real. So, something to think about. I love you guys. Thank you very much for the questions, and I look forward to talking to you guys again in the very near future. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.